Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are on the Ayn Rand Center UK network. And thank you for joining us because we are, and you are, we are all keeping it real. I have the honor and privilege of speaking to James Valliant this morning as we review Leonard Peikoff's podcast answers to some of the greatest questions and even some silly questions, but all of which Leonard Peikoff offers us great insights. Couldn't be happier than to be talking to all of you and talking to James Valliant this morning. James, how are you doing on this fine day?
It is a fine day, and I'm doing as fine as the day is out there. I hope the same is true for you, sir.
Well, I have to mention this fine day because, some people consider Ayn Rand to be among the dystopian writers. And certainly there's elements that she shares with 1984 and Brave New World and the whole Big Brother mentality, but she's not really there at all. And we had talked earlier about, is she a dystopian, a utopian? I don't think either. I think she's an idealist, and that ends up giving us some interesting plot devices in her stories.
Yes, she thinks conceptually. She thinks in principles. She does, she's not a determinist. And those, I think, are the guiding principles here. Ayn Rand believed in free will. She did not believe in determinism, and she believed in the creative capacity of the human mind. In fact, its unlimited potential. And so Ayn Rand is not going to say, this is the way the future will be. And even if the world were to go in her direction, she's not going to claim that we will have eliminated all dishonesty, all irrationality, all evil from the world. People still have free will, and individuals, and on the other side, not just the negative side, but on the positive side, she envisioned a world of such creative minds, artists, scientists, engineers, all kinds of, all the way from medical doctors to, the entire range, architects and stuff. She can envision a world in which Reardon create Reardon metal and Galts create Galt motors, and Dagny Taggart can implement such ideas to transform the world. So she could see a future in which it's a science fiction future if the mind were liberated. But the concretes on that she leaves to our imagination, because she realizes even she can't envision all the amazing, think of the science fiction world we'd be living in if the minds of John Galt, Hank Reardon, and Dagny Taggart were truly liberated to reshape this country. We'd be living in some science fiction utopia, but one that I can't really concretely envision, because the mind is creative. It will surprise us. It will be more than what we expect. Guaranteed. If you were to go in a time machine 200 years ago and you were to predict to them computers, smartphones, televisions, trips to the moon, they would think you would just be some kind of fantasist with all these amazingly optimistic predictions about what humans can do in the future and what their powers will be.
In a more optimistic context, I like the old saying that most people spend their whole lives looking for paradise. If they just stop and look around, they'd realize they're already there. Well, that's an exaggeration, but here we go. Leonard Peikoff was asked this question: what would the world be like if, here we go, every person were an objectivist? Is this possible? Well, I think James, you've given us some idea where we're going here already, but Leonard Peikoff starts his answer off this way. He says, well, in other words, you're asking, what would it be like if everyone were rational, honest, productive, and respected the rights of others? Well, what is your fear? You're implying the fear that everybody in such a world would be interchangeable robots. And we would have the paradox that this individualistic viewpoint leads to total non-individualism. Well, that would not happen. There's a huge range of individual options within the broad abstractions of philosophy. There's a whole spectrum of people who fit perfectly within the objectivist philosophy. Not only a whole variety of careers and personal preferences in romance and vacations and the like, but even in whether they're generally more sober or more funny, whether they're more generally upward looking or more pessimistic, not irrationally so. But there are future events that could go either way, more active or more interested in lounging around. there are a tremendous number of differences, as you see even within Ayn Rand's heroes. Now, Dr. Peikoff goes on, but I want to stop there for a moment because he'll mention later, for example, the stereotypical, if I'm an objectivist, I should dye my hair orange and become an architect. And Dr. Peikoff acknowledges this enormous range of rational, or at least not irrational, preferences in life.
Absolutely. There's a whole range of options out there that are wonderful, good things, but may not be your thing. And it may depend upon your context, for whatever reason. This is what I associate with this is what I enjoy to do. This is just I tend to be more like this in my, attitudes. And we don't really understand what all that is. And it could come from a perfectly innocent context, these variations. But you haven't eliminated human variation when you say, be rational, be independent. We want a free society. That's not, those big abstractions are not going to, Robert, the differences between objectivists, if anything in the last 50 years has refuted the idea that an objectivist world would be a bunch of stamped out automatons, it's been the last 50 years. It's not only a bunch of disagreements for which there could be a good, solid, clean answer and somebody is wrong and somebody is right. There could be all kinds of other things in which that's just you, Robert. Robert, you love to play music and perform music. It means something to you in a way that performing, see, I love to listen to music. Oh, sure, I do. But it's not such that I get a personal joy out of performing in the same way that you do. That's a difference between you and me, and it's a difference that I cherish. I am grateful for that difference because I love to hear music and you're one of those guys who makes it. And so there's plenty of room in this world for individual variation of all kinds, of all sorts. I am a talkative fellow. I love to argue and discuss, and I'm loquacious. And some people are just more reserved and quieter, and they're more thoughtful. And sometimes I think they've got the superior approach to happiness when I get all wound up into an argument. But then at the end, I realize, no, I love it. I love to argue. I love to engage. And when I talk to my, let's say, shyer friends, they say, yeah, Jim, it's fun watching you do that. I couldn't do that, but it's fun watching you engage like that. We're different. Ayn Rand was an individualist. She celebrated the differences between individuals. She knew that volition and reason did not preclude differences, but is what opens up human creativity. Our volition is our power of thought, and our power of individual thought is the source of individual variation. If we couldn't think, if we didn't have free will, we'd all be as similar as bees in a hive. We'd all be as similar as any other species of animal. It's true, perhaps, that there's some personality differences between chimps and dogs as you move up the chain of biological chain to mammals. But the truth is, even they aren't nothing like the individualists that humans can be because of our creative minds. People think reason is this straitjacket that sort of ties you to one concrete vision of the future of reality, and that's it. No, 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 no. Free will opens up and expands possibilities. It expands creative options. You can see just the range of human art and human science, the things that people have done. It is, in fact, the source of all of that variation. It's not the thing that restricts the variation between humans. It's what creates individual difference and uniqueness. They've got it all upside down.
It can be a challenge, even for me. I was watching, Kirk Barbera has the outstanding show on art here on the Ayn Rand Center UK. That's 5 o'clock my time. That would be 10 p.m. in the UK. And he had on guests from the folks who are putting together the Resurrecting Romanticism conference this year. If you missed that show, definitely go back and watch it later today. And it was interesting to me because, people like Stephen Syke, for example, great musicians, people you would call virtuosos. They use that word virtuoso. Well, I'm not a virtuoso. I'm compared to them, I'm more of a dabbler. I am a guitar player, but you see the mandolin. I haven't quite mastered the violin yet. I like, jack of all trades, master of some. And sometimes I have to ask myself, well, Ayn Rand said about pride, well, precondition of self-esteem is that radiant selfishness of soul which desires the best in all things, in values of matter and spirit, a soul that seeks above all else to achieve its own moral perfection, valuing nothing higher than itself. And she goes on, but when I thought the best in all things, well, maybe I should spend more time woodshedding, shredding on the guitar, getting to the point where I am a virtuoso. And then I had to remind myself, well, best depends on your standard of value, on your hierarchy. What is best for me and what is best for you in terms of philosophy is probably identical. But what is best for us in terms of our approach to music or art or the study of law or history are very different things. And I hope people can take in what Dr. Peikoff has said here. And if they ever catch themselves second guessing, well, maybe I should live in a fancier house, or maybe I should be driving a better car. Maybe I'm not a good objectivist because I see other objectivists who seem more successful in this or that domain.
Comparison with other people is just not the way to go, not the way to go. The fact that I'm not a Horowitz or a Rubinstein doesn't mean that I can't be the best pianist that I could be, piano player. And if that's what I find rewarding, then if that's the joy of my life, then be the best piano player I can be. Okay, I may not turn that into my profession if I'm not a virtuoso, if I'm not up to professional standards. But on the other hand, I can still enjoy playing the piano if I'm not Vladimir Horowitz, I hope, because that's an awfully high standard to achieve. Now, I can still appreciate Vladimir Horowitz's genius as a pianist, even if I'm not Vladimir Horowitz, but I can still get rewards and joy from playing as best as I can the piano. And so what we're saying here is enhance your life with all of your values. Don't leave any of it on the table. Squeeze all the juice out of life. Don't leave any wine that looks good untasted. Nothing on the table should be left of value. That means that if you do find joy, and it is a real joy for music, even if you're not a Vladimir Horowitz, you can build that and make that part of your life and an enriching, rewarding part of your life. For gosh sakes, people, find your values and pursue them. They're yours. They're not going to be dictated by some blueprint of ideas. Ayn Rand says, be rational and be productive. That is not going to tell you, Joe Dokes, what you're going to find the most joy in, what you're going to be, each of us has such a tremendous range of potentials, and each of us has a unique context. For me, being an advocate, being an attorney, being an advocate of Ayn Rand's ideas is what fits my values, Jim Valiant's values and joys in life, the things I find rewarding. Now, there are other people who are horrified about speaking in public. They find no joy in it. It is nothing but stress for them. They do the studies. They say speaking in public is a greater fear that some people have than other much more realistic fears like traffic accidents or disease or something. People fear public speaking that much. And I can understand that. I mean, they don't have to do that. That's not for them. What's for me is not for them, and we can both be good objectivists. What we're doing here is applying broad conceptualized principles. We're not dictating the concretes. And for that, you have to consult your own psychology, your own context, your own life.
So Leonard Peikoff goes on, although you may have covered much of this. I've got to get it out there because it reminds me of the show I did last week. He says, well, you can agree that all these people are objectivists. Some you like, but some you may dislike, even when you know they're rational. It's just not within the kind of values that you want. You don't love the kinds of person that someone else does. You never would love that kind. Not because that kind is bad, but it's not your version. You admire spaceflight. He thinks it's good, but he'd rather develop his ranch. Big cities are too noisy for him. Well, that is not anti-rational. He would rather spend time on computers and conversations than read novels, even than read Ayn Rand's novels. Well, that's his preference. If he fulfills the virtues, Well, he doesn't have to study the texts to be an objectivist in the sense of fulfilling all the moral requirements. So you would find a huge number of differences. Again, I've talked about, well, for example, I did a whole show on ambition and made the point you've got to be ambitious. You've especially got to be morally ambitious. And that one you need to be 100%. But in terms of your professional ambitions, they need to suit your values and your goals, your desires, what you want in your life. So I'm happy to hear Leonard Peikoff also say, look, not everybody is going to be for you, even in an ideal world. And that's to be expected.
I don't know if this is going to offend anybody in the objectivist world, but there are people who I think get the principles of objectivism, understand it. They're advocates of reason and individualism in a free society. And I really just don't like spending much time with them. I understand that we have some significant agreements, and I'm happy to join in with them on a political or intellectual cause. But on the other hand, am I going to want to spend, party with them? Am I going to want to go to a concert with them or play chess with them? No, they're just not my cup of tea as a human being. Ayn Rand was an individualist. She understood, as I say, the role that only the individual can think, only the individual can value. And ideas and values being individual in nature mean that the variations, as I say, free will is about the creative variations in the possibilities of what it is to be a human. What it is to be a human has a range like no other species on this planet. And even within whole categories of agreement, someone is, let's not even take it out of the objectivist context. Say, I really love to play chess. That's what, I'm not a chess player, in fact. They'll say, I really love to play chess. These are my chess buddies. This is my chess community. And I'm really those people because they value that. In fact, I may have a value with them in a way that I don't have with certain objectivists. Now, Ayn Rand herself didn't particularly like chess, so a bunch of objectivists aren't into chess. But gee, imagine I'm an objectivist into chess. I'm going to have non-objectivist friends who are into chess, and a bunch of objectivists may not be my friends at all because they don't understand my love of chess. That's okay, folks. We're individualists here. We're not stamping out robots. In fact, that would be thwart Ayn Rand's idea of freedom. Freedom liberates the individual mind. It liberates us to be all the unique, amazing, wonderful things each of us can be.
Exactly right. I just imagine going to somebody like Thomas Schubaum and telling him, yeah, you shouldn't be part of an orchestra, or you shouldn't conduct an orchestra unless all the members of the orchestra are objectivists. Or do that in sports, do that in baseball, do that in any domain. Maybe if you were a small business owner and you happened to know enough of your friends who were objectivists, you could pull that off. But even there, I would say that's going to be a bad rule to follow unless you're in a particularly tiny niche. No, there are plenty of good people out there. But even in the objectivist community, not everybody's going to be your kind of person. I'll read the wrap up to Leonard Peikoff's answer here because he was again asked about a world in which everyone's an objectivist. And he says, is it possible for this to happen? Well, theoretically, yes. But I think it's tremendously unlikely. To be an objectivist is a very demanding thing. And no matter what your training, your society is inculcating good philosophy, your upbringing, and so on, none of that would produce automatic virtue. Well, you always have free will. You always have to work and struggle in life. Virtue is effort, rewarded effort, but nonetheless, effort. And nothing is ever going to produce a world in which that's true of everybody. It's possible, but very unlikely. So, close quote, Leonard Peikoff. And I'm going to jump right into the second question because I'm sure you have something to say about that. But right after that, or on our list here, he's asked, since Galt's Gulch, a bit of a spoiler here, but yeah, since Galt's Gulch is as depicted in Atlas Shrugged, well, doesn't actually exist, or I haven't yet received my invitation. Is it fair to say that objectivism in practice is not absolute? Now, the wording there was a little strange to me, but Leonard Peikoff gets it because he goes in right away and says, well, absolutely not. What's the connection? Well, let's say There are no actual heroes. Well, it has nothing to do with whether it's possible or whether it's a moral absolute that certain things are good and other things are evil. In fact, if you exist and it's a rational morality, you should become the first hero if there aren't any.
I love that. Oh man, that's one of his best answers ever.
Yeah, and he says if you have a rational morality, the good, the perfect, it is possible to you. Whether John Galt doesn't actually exist or a collection of heroes in some valley doesn't exist is irrelevant.
Oh, God,
I love that.
It's true. Ayn Rand is projecting. Oh, the truth is that I believe in principle with Ayn Rand's projection. Ayn Rand said about Atlas Shrugged, people tell me that men such as I write about don't exist. Well, the fact that Atlas Shrugged was written and published is my proof that they do. And there's something to that. What she's saying is they may not be the fictional projections in my novel, but they have to have exhibited, people like me and my publisher and so forth have to exhibit the same kind of virtues that my heroes do, at least in principle, for Atlas Shrugged to exist at all. Once you grasp objectivism, yeah, you can be the hero of your own life. Once you grasp objectivism, maybe you're not going to be John Galt and invent some revolutionary new motor, but guess what? You can exhibit all the virtues of objectivism regardless of your, say, level of native intelligence or something, regardless really even of the particular interest you have in doing that passion of yours, fulfilling that passion of yours. The fact of the matter is, by pursuing reason, by pursuing your passion, you are, in fact, exhibiting objectivist virtues. You are a hero, and you're the hero of your own life. It's astonishing to me how people think of the Valley as a kind of utopia. And Ayn Rand has a chapter, in fact, where she calls it the utopia of greed. But she's very explicit about the nature of the Valley. It is not a, constructed governmental utopia where she's projecting what the ideal government would be. Not at all. It is the private property of Midas Mulligan, and you can't buy in unless you agree to this, in effect, very complex homeowners association known as the strike. And once you do, and Midas Mulligan does let you buy into this private property, then you're part of a private voluntary community. It's not meant to be a projection of what the ideal government would be. No, in fact, she has later on, Judge Narragansett and so forth at the very end, he is reconstructing what the government of the world would be in a principled projection of that. On the other hand, she is showing you what a world would look like of rational individuals who respected one another's selfishness, who honored one another's reason and individualism, a world of freedom in which no one is mentally or physically dependent on someone, their handout, in effect. Yes, it's the most benevolent place where people care and love for each other on a selective individual basis, but it's not, let me put it this way, being an opponent to determinism, she doesn't have any version of the Marxist utopia of tomorrow where the state withers away and we all become supermen like, Shakespeare and Einstein in some weird fantasy projection like Karl Marx does. She is frankly telling you, I don't know what the concretes of tomorrow will be. But if we are free, if we are committed to reason, then the possibilities are endless and amazing, breathtaking what can happen. And she's giving us just a glimpse. When I read the book, it's almost as though you want to stop and live in the Valley. You're seeing all these wonderful people, their wonderful interactions. What a wonderful world this would be. Couldn't we make the whole novel? Couldn't we turn a whole story into just this wonderful fun I'm having here? But the truth is that kind of, quote, utopia is only effective as a contrast to what the heroes have had to endure with the rest of the novel. If I were just, Ayn Rand loves conflict between heroes. Her main hero conflicts are between Rourke and Dominique, or between Galt and Dagny, not between Wesley Mouch and James Taggart and Galt. No, they're not even worthy. Even Ellsworth Toohey. the most efficacious of all her villains. The conflict with him is only to make a point. The real conflict is between Rourke and Winan and Dominique. It's the good guys in conflict that Ayn Rand is more interested in. Think about that. Even in a world of rational people, there's going to be disagreements, is what she's saying. That does, there's no guarantee there that people are all going to think the same. Absolutely not. And what's more interesting is that conflict. On the other hand, if there weren't these social issues that she was addressing in Atlas Shrugged, the dystopia going around this utopia of greed, it wouldn't have the contrasting power that it does. As a literary work, if it was just heroes living in true free society, it might get boring as a story because it's all just, this is good, this is good, this is good. Maybe it would be a nice fantasy projection, but it wouldn't make much of a novel. Wouldn't make much of a novel. To make a novel, she has to show conflict. She'll show heroes in conflict. That's more interesting to her. And so that tells you something about the utopia she'd even project as being possible. But on the other hand, it is free will, it is reason that opens up all of these amazing, unpredictable, creative possibilities for humanity. And that's what she wants to liberate. It's not some boring, stamp it out future that most of these other utopian writers think about. She doesn't devise utopias that way.
Excellent. Yeah, it reminds me of Ayn Rand's answer to A.E. Hausman. And I'm trying to remember where she wrote this, but it's the wrap up on one of her essays. And she quotes his poem in which he says, how am I to face the odds of man's bedevilment and God's? I, a stranger and afraid in a world I never made. And Ayn Rand says, the answer to that is, well, why didn't you? By all means, go out there and become that first hero. So I love that answer from Leonard Peikoff. And in that regard, actually, I want to jump to question number 3, which takes us a little off track, and then we will return to it. But first, because I have been neglecting my duties in supporting this channel, which makes all of these great conversations possible, thank you to Wes Stewart. Thank you very much for your super chat, for supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. Folks, if you're not already a member, if you're new to the channel, the Ayn Rand Center UK is entirely supported by the good people who choose to support it by becoming members both of the organization and the channel. You can do that. You can go to aynrandcenter.co.uk. You see a link right at the top of the chat. Click membership, join. There are 5 different levels with different perks. There are some great goodies in there. I should make a little cheat sheet with them all listed out. But the most recent one, James, you are participating in these Saturday trials, these mock trials, seems to almost not give it the credit that it deserves, of putting people on trial in our own courtroom, not the court of public opinion, but the court of rational opinion. And folks at the silver or higher, the third or higher level of membership, get to watch these trials that take place on the weekends. And James, as a prosecuting attorney, I can't imagine anybody better to represent the prosecuting side. Well, the great Matthew Humphreys, of course, in the UK is your opponent on the defense side.
I just have to say, Matthew Humphreys is a prominent British barrister, really good at what he does. And I was a prosecutor in the United States for almost 18 years. And we've put Ragnar Daneskjöld on trial. We've put Rosie Ginsburg on trial as a Stop Oil protester. And I must say, we are having so much fun. Mark Pellegrino came in to play my witness in the last one. And the jury deliberations, I understand, will take place this weekend, but it's only available if you subscribe at a certain level. There are all kinds of amazing perks. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're doing here is not only spreading the ideas of Ayn Rand, what we're creating a conversation here that is absolutely necessary so that people can understand the way we think, the way we converse. More than that, we're creating a community of worldwide serious students of objectivism. And if you think these things are important, I happen to think that they're like the most important things that we can be doing right now for the good of the world. And I don't normally look at things from that, social perspective like Ayn Rand does. But the instant I do, I realize that the work going on here at the Ayn Rand Center UK is some of the most important work going on in the world. If you agree, please consider becoming a subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. Definitely hit like, share, make a comment, but also at whatever level you can afford, please become a subscriber. We could change the world. We really could. Turn it into that utopia we're talking about, a utopia we can't concretely envision because the potential of humanity is just that unlimited. But if you want to liberate that unlimited potential for the future, if you do want to see a world of limitless vistas as Ayn Rand could envision, supporting us is a good way of helping us get to that future.
Yes. So again, a huge thanks to Wes Stewart for a very generous super chat. We have one as well from Walter. Walter Bishak is in as well. Thank you for your support. No question, but there's a good conversation going on in the chat. Folks, if you're just kind of listening to the audio, take a look at the chat as well. Always a good conversation from our members and viewers. Incidentally, other reasons to become part of the Ayn Rand Center UK. We are fighting for the future. We are fighting to give these ideas more impact on today's culture. But also, we're developing these ideas as we speak. And as a host, I learn more every time I present. And each of us do. It's that spiral theory. We know what we know, but at the next layer, the next level, the next peel of the onion, we find, oh, I didn't apply that, though, to this other context, or I understand this part better. There are so many products of these conversations, but also, if that's not enough, the fight and your own personal development, this becomes a resting place, even a home for some of us when the world gets too crazy, and we need to see like minds, kindred spirits, rational people having rational conversations about things that matter, both personal and public. And finally, I'll just throw a fourth reason out there. I could go on all day with reasons to be part of the ARCUK. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It is pleasing and not just funny, although there's plenty of that too, but entertaining and in positive ways. So yes, by all means, please consider, if you're not already, becoming a member of the ARCUK. You can also join the YouTube channel, get a few perks there that are exclusive just to the YouTube channel. $ on this video will show you how to do that. And your super chats, by all means, put in those super chats, whether they are super stickers that just support the channel, which is great, or if you want to put in a chat message, because if you have a question to ask, it deserves to stand out. So by all means, please do that. Okay, more promos later and good reasons and fun reasons to support the channel. But let me jump to question number 3, and this is an easy one. This one is relatively light, but it comes up, and especially for you folks who are new to the philosophy, but really even those of us who've been around for a while. Question number 3, think about this. Leonard Peikoff was asked, I disagree with Ayn Rand on architecture as an art form and on the nature of masculinity and femininity, but I accept objective reality, reason, self-interest, capitalism. Am I still an objectivist? Now, I'm not going to read Dr. Peikoff's whole answer because it's long, but he makes the important point right at the start. He says, well, there is no list of concretes that bar someone from being an objectivist. Objectivism is a philosophy, and as such is defined in terms of essentials. The essentials are basically, well, what you said, when he mentions reason, self-interest, and capitalism. And what I offer in more detail in OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Objective reality, reason defined as the conceptualization of sense data via the use of logic as the means of knowledge, rational self-interest in ethics, laissez-faire capitalism in politics, and romanticism in aesthetics. All of these are integrated into one system. If you deny one of those, then, as I argue in OPAR, you deny them all. So you deny the whole philosophy. There are, however, countless forms in which you have to ask the question, how does that whole abstract philosophy apply to this particular case? If you're truly and honestly applying a philosophy, but you disagree with someone else, well, that has nothing to do with whether or not you're an objectivist. I frequently disagree with objectivists, for instance, on the presidential elections. I think such and such a character would be depraved and the other one would be better. And people say, well, look at what the other one believes. Now, I do believe that on every disagreement, it will ultimately be shown Well, that a contradiction can't exist. One position is correct and the other is not. But that doesn't mean, well, you know which is correct. And it doesn't mean the false view came from your not being an objectivist. Maybe your error came from an interpretation of facts, even though you conscientiously applied objectivism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he goes on, but I think that makes the point that needs to be made.
Objectivism doesn't answer all the questions of the universe, folks. Objectivism does have a philosophy, a complete philosophy, and as Leonard says, an integrated philosophy. If you deny the fundamentals in each of those, Dr. Peikoff argues in OPAR, you're denying all of them, as he indicates. Ayn Rand has integrated her system so brilliantly that if you deny the basics of each of those elements, you're denying each of the other elements. Study philosophy and study Leonard Peikoff's Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and understanding objectivism. Come to understand it as a set of abstract principles, but objectivism doesn't give you the answers in other sciences, and certainly objectivism doesn't give you the answers for your particular life. You have to consult you, ladies. In fact, one of the things Ayn Rand teaches when she teaches us individualism is philosophy by itself is not enough. Philosophy by itself does not tell John Galt to be an engineer and invent motors or to create a new moral philosophy and start a strike. It does in some way inform what he's saying, the content of the philosophy that he's teaching the world in Atlas Shrugged, but Dagny Taggart doesn't do that. Is she some lesser, is happiness impossible for her because that's not the role she takes? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's going to be individual variation, and objectivism doesn't answer all the questions of life. You've got to consult, introspect, consult your context. What do you find most enjoyable? What do you want out of life? And that's going to differ. Can objectivism dictate to Howard Rourke that he's going to be an architect? No, it isn't. Howard Rourke's unique personal context is going to lead him to be an architect within a set of true principles. Is he being rational? Is he being productive? Is he being independent? Yes, Rourke is embodying those virtues better than any other hero in history, on the other hand, up to that point at least. But is his being an architect dictated by objectivism? No. Any more than Dominique being a newspaper columnist is dictated by objectivism. No, or Stephen Mallory's being a sculptor is dictated by objectivism. No, for that kind of question, ladies and gentlemen, you have to consult, you have to introspect, consult your own personal context, your own personal values, what motivates you the most, what do you enjoy the most? And there are going to be good reasons for it, personally objective reasons, but they're not ones that I can abstract that would include you, Robert, or me, because each of us has to do that for each of ourselves.
Yes. I'm just looking in the chat here because although it's not in as a super chat, I've got to read Frank Gianlombardo's comment. I disagree with objectivists about legalizing hard drugs. There's something that could be said about that as far as certain drugs are necessarily, if consumed in public, akin to reckless driving. It would necessarily make you dangerous in an objective way. I don't know that that's a good case that could be made, but I'd be willing to listen to it. And the only reason I mention that is because at 6 o'clock UK time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock where you're at, James, the causes of the Californian crime crisis. Do we have enough C's there? An alliterative title, which always goes over well. On today's reality show, formerly the Daily Collective.
Yeah, we've got a name.
We've got a name. The reality show. I don't know. I feel like that was kind of borrowed from Keeping It Real, but that's okay. I'm good with that. The reality show today of the topics. Yes, of the topics we've got lined up, the causes of the Californian crime crisis is first on the list. And I have something to say about that. And happily, I'm going to be on today, so I'll have a chance to say it. But I kind of appreciate that comment from Frank there. I get why some people disagree about legalizing hard drugs. I think it's more akin to you can't or shouldn't make alcohol illegal, even though certain uses and being behind the wheel of an automobile are going to be reckless endangerment. So there's a conversation to be had there, and we're going to have it.
There's no question that those who regularly ingest drugs like LSD or PCP are not objectivists. They're suicide on the installment plan. They are destroying themselves. To become a drug addict is not in your interest, ladies and gentlemen. Now, that is a very different question than what we have to allow to be legal, in my mind. But the point is well taken. Drug addicts are not egoists, are they? They are acting in a long-term destructive way that we objectivists would normally have a very negative opinion about. Now, whether something should be against the law is an entirely different question. An entirely different question. The fact that people can consume, say, alcohol or even marijuana and not become raving lunatics obviously indicates to me that those should be legal substances. but at least an argument might be made that those who take, say, PCP, popularly known as angel dust, are so out of it anytime they're in public on that drug that I could understand the argument. I still disagree with it, but I can understand that position. At least I can understand the position.
There's a certain kind of, I shouldn't use the word, but I can't think of a better one, a certain kind of conservative who comes into the orbit of Ayn Rand's ideas or objectivism, who gets this wrong, who thinks that, well, obviously hard drugs need to be illegal, just like pornography should be illegal because it's corrupting our youth, especially the ready access to it on the internet. And it's almost like they've never heard Ayn Rand on either of these issues, say censorship, local and express, where she didn't talk a lot about pornography, but she used it then to talk about free thought. And she made the point she personally regards pornography as disgusting, but absolutely should not be censored by the US government. They have no place in that.
I kind of have to agree. I even as a guy, I'm not a big fan of pornography at all. I think it's, sex is too wonderful, sacred, and beautiful to me to be depicted in kind of crude, casual ways. And I don't like that. And so in a sense, there's a connection between me and Rand here on this. On the other hand, I don't care how hardcore the porn is, it's got to be legal. It would be a violation of my First Amendment rights not to allow me to have so long as there's no criminal activity, no violation of rights going on, it is just consenting adults. Any kind of pornography's got to be legal. It's exactly analogous.
Right. So the folks who tell me, objectivism is all about protection of individual rights. No, that's an aspect of the political theory of objectivism. That's not the philosophy at all.
Right.
But how many people do we know who say, objectivism is about the political fight? It's about fighting the left, or anything to do where it's it's kind of like the libertarian idea that as long as you don't violate anybody else's rights, morality doesn't apply to what you're doing. Which is exactly the opposite of the truth.
Exactly upside down. You can't establish the morality of freedom if you don't have a wider objective morality. There's got to be an objective moral standard for us in order to even develop a theory of rights. They've got it so upside down, inside out, and backwards. And besides, what they're doing is they're saying it doesn't matter how evil, how destructive, how self-destructive, how destructive of the world in other ways your behavior might be, so long as you don't initiate physical force. They don't care. They wouldn't care if Kant went out and said, kill yourself, in effect, morally. Oh, no big deal. Or a Christian going out and saying, carry your own cross and be a martyr for that's swell too. They have no problem.
As long as you didn't violate your neighbor's rights, it's all
violate
good.
Your neighbor's rights. It's still a good thing for them.
Not just should be legal, but is actually not a moral issue. Which means morality has nothing to do with actually living your life as long as people leave you alone.
Exactly. Right.
And in that regard, and this will be a quick one, question number 4. Even in Utopia, will Ayn Rand's statement that no man can be a true philosopher before the age of 40 still be true? Now, that's an interesting question that Leonard Peikoff's being asked, and an interesting observation from Ayn Rand as far as being a true philosopher. But I think it's good to bring it up in this context because I talk about older objectivists with this attitude. For example, morality doesn't matter except in politics. I understand when young people come in with that perspective. Likewise, I understand when young people come in with that perspective of, I found this new philosophy and this is telling me exactly what everybody has to do. It's the older people that drive me crazy in that regard. They're the ones who should, by that time, be the true philosophers. So Leonard Peikoff is asked about that. Well, can you be a true philosopher before the age of 40? You and I have had this discussion before, James, so I'm going to jump right to Dr. Peikoff's answer. Yes, I would say so, because a true philosopher is not a rationalist. That means he has to acquire his abstractions from his experience or the experience of others that he understands. He needs, therefore, a vast knowledge of particulars, of the world, of people, of history, of the variance of thought, in order then to stand back, see what is in common, see how these ideas are interrelated, and finally reach a set of universal principles that are tied to reality, which would be a philosophy. This is a complex, time-consuming matter of intellectual growth, which I do not think can be done by anyone, however precocious, in their teens or 20s. It can be undertaken in one's late 20s, I think, or even in the early 20s, but it will take a long time to really be at home in it. And he goes on a bit, but that just accepting that in advance, that
critical part here is that whatever you think of that question, and I absolutely agree with the premise of his question, a teenager, even someone in their 20s, is not going to produce great philosophy. You do need experience. Now, Ayn Rand started, writing philosophical notes when she was in her late 20s, and she wrote The Fountainhead when she was in her 30s. So let me suggest she was engaged in some pretty serious philosophical thought before she was 40. But on the other hand, you do need a certain, I don't care what age you claim it kicks in at. The point is, you do need a huge base of experience and knowledge before you can inductively really see principles so abstract as philosophy, the reality of them in a non-rationalistic way. At some point, that kicks in. So I don't know if 40 is a magic number, or if it's 42 or 35 or what, but I do know that you have to have a certain amount of experience in life to really be a true philosopher. So I agree with his general point, but even though we could argue over, say, the number, the point here, though, is when it connects to a future objectivist world, objectivism has not repealed the principles of human nature. Human nature remains human nature. Humans will still mature as humans need to mature in the way that humans develop and so forth. The human nature is not again, unlike most people who project utopias like Karl Marx, who believed that one day we'd all become mentally on the level of Newton and Shakespeare. Once the state withers away in his fantasy paradise of utopia where human nature is actually changed. No. And in fact, for most of these Shangri-La utopia visions, they have to have a new man. A whole new human nature has to be constructed. Ayn Rand is not like that at all. Ayn Rand is not, in fact, Ayn Rand is respecting human nature in a way that previous philosophers have never respected human nature. Ayn Rand understood the role of reason as our only basic means of knowing, as our most fundamental means of surviving, as the reason why we need the social condition known as freedom. So she's making big, broad principles based on human nature and the range of variability within human nature. One is an individualist and advocates freedom because one understands that human beings can be so radically different. She actually has a utopia that takes into account the full range of human variation, the full range of possible humans that there might be out there. But on the other hand, she hasn't repealed human nature. She's respected human nature in the process. She's not calling for a change in Homo sapiens. She's calling us for us to respect the existing nature of Homo sapiens.
And yes, absolutely. And there's two things that I would say to young objectivists. in this regard, because some people might hear that and say, what do you mean I'm not a true philosopher? I really get it, and I'm really doing my best, and I'm trying hard. And the two things that I would want for young objectivists, and for thinking back to young me in this regard, is, first of all, you come into a philosophy like this, and everything is, Ayn Rand is so clear. You know, after reading her and maybe after adding it all together in your own head, she's right about this, and it makes you want to go out and fight on the barricades right away, even before you have enough experience to really know what that's going to look like. The other thing I would say is, if you get into this philosophy, and folks, if you're new to objectivism, if you've only just read, say, The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged or For the Virtue of Selfishness, and you think, I don't know if I can live up to that. I don't know if I can be Howard Rourke. Living up to it doesn't mean what it will look like when you're 40. No, all it needs to look like at this point in your life is that you are honest and earnest, that you're willing to be rational, that you are willing to take what you do know and apply it to your life. You don't have to be, I was going to say perfect, but perfect is the wrong word, because you do want to be morally perfect in the sense of pride. You want to be morally ambitious, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get all of the answers right away or know exactly how you want to apply them to your life and your career and romance. And so, yes, coming in, you certainly are not a philosopher at the age of 20, but you do want to be, for your own sake, honest and earnest.
And the truth is that even before we can, say, be integrated systematic philosophers as a mature person, we still use philosophy. We're still inculcating philosophy. We're still integrating it and into our being. It's still an important part of who we are. Before 40 or 35 or 45, whenever that age kicks in, we're still dependent on philosophy. Now, that means that young people are generally dependent on what they are taught. It takes an exceptional young person. And I want to shout out to all the Ayn Rand fans so far in history, because if you really get it, and if you really believe it, you are an exceptional human being. You are a virtuous person just by that fact, in my mind. You as a young person were able to say, now I know that's wrong, and to some extent that's all I could do when I was young. I know there's something fishy there. I know there's something wrong there. I don't trust that idea. And Ayn Rand's ideas, the more and more I studied them, the more and more, and I had to slowly be, pushed into it. I had my questions. I didn't really get things. I had to spiral around things several times before they really even sunk. But still, I want to just a shout out to all those Ayn Rand, independent, rational, brave minds out there. You exhibit virtue just in understanding and advocating Ayn Rand's ideas in this cultural context. Yeah, we can't probably be systematic original philosophers at the age of 20, but we are still dependent on it, and we still think. We're still aware of the issue. I know I was aware of the issue by the age of 20, and I was actively rejecting different philosophies that I regarded as suspicious, wrong, dubious, and more moving into becoming a serious student and advocate of Ayn Rand's ideas. That doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen automatically. Be patient with yourself, your own learning arc. And, the truth is, when you're 20 years old, consider everything else and consider it hard. Ayn Rand isn't telling you not to consider other ideas either. My God, no. People have this idea that somehow you become an objectivist and you've got this, okay, I'm going to be studying Atlas Shrugged, an introduction to objectivist epistemology 24/7 for the rest of my life, and trying to, no. That again would be a dramatic misunderstanding of Ayn Rand. She wants you to continue to think for yourself, think selfishly, use your context, and keep an active mind about all that's coming into your field of vision, experientially, and the books you read, and everything else. It's going to be you, ladies and gentlemen, and that individual you is exactly what Ayn Rand says is your aim. The fulfillment of all that you can be, or like that old army ad, be all that you can be. Yep. It's such a wonderful summary of Aristotle's attitude about ethics, and very much embodied by Ayn Rand's ethics. To be all you can be is a matter of what you are. And Ayn Rand is not taking a drop of that away from you. with objectivism. You're not becoming some Randroid. That very word is offensive to objectivists because it's the exact opposite of everything Ayn Rand's individualism and advocacy of reason really is all about.
Could not have said that better myself. I'm going to take a quick break to say thank you to Frank Gialombardo, who has a question, and it's a little off topic, but put it in as a super chat. So I'm going to ask you this, James. He says, Jim, do you study the Shakespeare authorship question? Now, folks might wonder, well, Shakespeare authorship, like, was Shakespeare really the one who wrote all of Shakespeare's stuff? Why would you ask that? But given the book behind Jim there, Creating Christ by James Valliant, this is a man who has studied history in college and has obviously studied the history of the Bible. But do you know or have any thoughts on Shakespeare? I personally am skeptical of the skeptics. I don't see any reason to doubt the authorship.
Well, we do. The evidence is not perfect from 400 years ago. It's not as though when someone can say, aha, well, we know that, through the physical evidence that this play was written by William Shakespeare. We don't have paperwork that can connect the dots all the way. And there have been theories, I think there are rather speculative theories, when you look at the real evidence, that say Francis Bacon or the Earl of Oxford were the real authors behind Shakespeare's plays. And they were smart guys. I mean, Francis Bacon was one of the great philosophers and politicians of his age. The Earl of Oxford was a highly cultured man. But did they write Shakespeare's plays? I think the recent evidence, now I'm not an expert, I wouldn't claim that this is, definitive answer here, but simply from the evidence that I've seen, the evidence really strongly, it seems to me, indicates that William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon really is the author of the plays and sonnets attributed to William Shakespeare. So that's my personal opinion, but I wouldn't call myself a super expert on the topic.
Excellent. I'm not even, but anyway, without getting any more into that, I think you've given us a good answer. And we've got another super chat question here, or at least a super chat comment, which I do know a little bit more about, but only because I've done whole episodes on the topic. Adherent of Lady Columbia's in with a generous $10 super chat and says, spent 10 to 11 hours on the question of masculinity and femininity and found, 1, it can only be in a special context. 2, it stems from biology, obviously. And 3, for men, it is rigidity. For females, flexibility. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I'm inclined to disagree, especially with the idea that it's only in a special context. Personally, one of the great things I love about sex and gender is how it colors and flavors, it touches everything, including things that have nothing to do with sex and romance. But it just makes this world this beautiful male and female colored experience of life.
That's it. We're individuals, and masculinity and femininity are a collection of characteristics, I think. The other thing that bothers me about that is rigidity versus flexibility. I think that both sides, when it comes to relating to one another, need to have a firm sense of themselves and I, if that's what you mean by the rigidity part, but also both sides have to be open to new values and what the other person is and all the wonderful, unexpected things. I mean, when I meet a new person, especially when I'm starting a new relationship, it's been a while because I'm married for a while, but what you're doing when you get to know someone through the dating process is like you're unwrapping a package. And there's nothing more pleasurable than taking your time to unwrap this unique package that this distinct human being is and all their virtues. If I can use a camera analogy, when we get to know another human being, if there is a value overlap, if there is a deep respect, at a very deep level, I'm assuming, then what we want to do is we want to open our apertures as wide as possible to all the values that this person is. And I can tell you whether it's romance or even just friendship with my other guy friends, when I open my aperture to experience and share all the value, even if it's not a value from my context, and I open myself up to sharing and experiencing that value with my friend or someone else, I've added to my life. I've expanded my life to include all the values that this, and seeing it perhaps, now it may not end up to being my favorite value, but I can now see that value from that other person's perspective, and my life is enhanced. My life is enhanced. Yes, I'm not going to submerge myself. The value has to be consistent with my view of things. It has to be a real value from my perspective. Of course, I'm not losing my sense of self in any of this. On the other hand, I'm being open to what all the wonderful, virtuous people in my life can share with me, just as they're opening up to me. And it's a trade now of spiritual values, back and forth. Open your aperture. If you're a man, open your aperture if you're a woman, but don't lose your sense of self, right, if that's what you mean by rigidity either. So both need both, if that makes sense.
It does. And adherent of Lady Columbia is in with another super chat. Thank you. And says, I meant species context, since he mentioned context, since seahorses are weird. Well, we know seahorses have an unusual gender expression, to say the least. And I think it would be a great conversation to have, because it's going to depend on what he means by rigidity, what he means by flexibility. Because certainly I think in the masculine realm, we highlight resolve and assertiveness.
This is, if that's what you mean, then I do think that, there's a certain thing about assertiveness, taking the physical lead might be more associated. Now, I'm not being second. I'm not saying women can't be aggressive, assertive, initiative, but still it's a question. And in a lot of these things, it's a question of degree too. And that's why I'm not sure that rigid versus flexible is the way to approach masculine or feminine, because again, there's degrees of both, if that makes sense.
It's interesting that in every conversation of this kind, every attribute I can put out there, on the women's side, women it's about receptiveness or softness. And yet you can apply those to men, and not in ways that are feminizing. There are men, for example, who are more elegant, more graceful than 98% of the women out there, and yet are no less masculine. So it's a little more complicated than just lining up a list of attributes and saying these are feminine, these are masculine.
But it is rooted in biology. I'll give you that.
but even there, rooted is tough.
Just rooted. Humans have conceptual minds.
Yes.
It's our values, it's our thinking, it's our abstractions. You can't ignore, to try and understand the human animal by skipping thought is what a lot of psychologists did, and it created disastrous theories of psychology.
Yes.
Let me just throw that out there.
So I'm sure that James, that you or maybe even me could put together a list of questions in this book, Keeping It Real, that would let us penetrate this topic at greater length. But it's a great question from adherent of Lady Columbia, and I do appreciate that.
We could we'll do a show on it, adherent.
It's a topic that is always calling out for extra clarification.
Yes.
I was going to say never gets old, but that's so cliche. No, it's a topic that's always of value to revisit. And I've done whole shows on masculinity and femininity. Amy Nasir and I have done shows. And again, it's always right. The insights are always valuable. So thank you for that. We also have a super chat what's the correct word? Super sticker, a contribution from Jeff Bannister. So Jeff, thank you for that. Very much appreciated. Now we've hit the top of the hour, and we had one more question left, but I think we'll save that, if you don't mind, James, because it was the topic, what, if anything, would prevent a proper government if we ever establish one from sliding towards socialism as the United States has done? Leonard Peikoff's answer is the obvious one, which is there's nothing that concrete that can be done that's always going to work. Eternal vigilance is the order of the day. We can have that conversation another time, but yeah, we're past the top of the hour, and we've got shows coming up. We've got a 12:30 show coming up with Mark and Nicholas. That's going to be good. We've got I'm saying 12:30. Of course, I mean 5:30 UK time. See, I'm localizing everything. It's my subjective time. And half an hour after that, top of that hour, 6 p.m. UK time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock where you're at, James. It is the reality show. And yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about the causes of the California crime crisis. We're going to talk about Trump and Biden. Man, have I got something to say about the polling that suggests they're neck and neck right now. If that election were held today, the criminal versus the, how do you describe Biden? He's horrible in every way, but he's only medium horrible in every way.
Well, we'll just see how medium horrible he is, because I'm going to be there. John Wass will be there. You will be there. I understand Michael Leibowitz will be there. What a great collection of people. Well, we're going to have a great conversation. Please do try to join us in about an hour.
Yes. So that is why you're watching now, and that is why you are supporting, and thank you for your support, the Ayn Rand Center UK. We'll wrap it up here. We will see y'all in the channel will see y'all in 25 minutes, and we will see you at the top of the hour. Thank you, James, for another outstanding discussion, and we'll do it again next Wednesday. Good day, all.
Thank you, my brother. Take care.